But now we have other things that we can sprinkle in and not just say sphincter, even though sphincter is a fantastic word. There's more that can go into this event of regulating blood flow into a region and ultimately into various different tissues, capillary beds. When we talk about local blood flow, not every capillary is going to be perfused with blood at any given time. Okay, I get it. Who cares? What I really want you to kind of understand here is what can affect blood flow into a region. I mean, not all capillaries are filled simultaneously. Okay. I hope it makes sense that blood flow into the bicep would be different or the arm would be different than into the forearm, depending upon what you're doing. Blood flow into the abdominal region or thoracic region is different compared to your legs. So I hope that kind of makes some sense. Flow is going to be measured in milliliters per minute. And I'll throw out some numbers. I think I have some numbers. There's numbers for blood pressure. Those you have to know. But, I'll be giving out a few different numbers here and there. And unless I tell you, you don't really have to remember all of these flow rates, milliliters per minute, all that fun stuff. Okay. There are a couple numbers that you will, but I'll be throwing out a whole bunch willy-nilly probably later on here, and you don't need to know every single one of those. All right. But understanding how I can affect blood flow into a region, blood flow into a structure, that is important. There are, as you can see right here, many things that can affect local blood flow. This is going to be our first dip of the toe into how we can regulate blood pressure. Okay. So these are local blood flow. How is local blood flow regulated? What is dependent upon local blood flow to be good? Well, how much vascularity? Myogenic, muscle. Okay. And we've hinted at some of that. How much total blood flow there is in the body, and I may reference some numbers there, and just local regulatory factors. Okay. Some secretions that can occur and that can happen ultimately. When we talk about degree of vascularization, we are talking about these two things. Okay. We are talking about how many vessels within a tissue. Okay. And by the extent of vessels in the tissue, I mean, this is really the key indicator there. To have vascularization, we need to have formation of. So, I mean, angiogenesis is a part of this. Okay. These are the two major ones. The book goes into a third one, and it's called regression. And that is basically the opposite of angiogenesis. So there is a third one, and I'll give you an example of this here in a second. Let me get through some of this stuff. So those organs, those structures that are going to be much more metabolically active will have a higher degree of vascularization. Okay. The number of blood vessels into that tissue because of the increase in demand of oxygen. Okay. Brain, skeletal muscle, heart, liver, spleen, I guess you could throw in there. But those four guys right there, they do a lot of stuff, right? Heart contracts forever until you're dead. Brain does a lot of stuff. Skeletal muscle doing a lot of work. Liver doing a bunch of different things that we haven't really talked about yet. So these are very vascularized structures. Some structures, other structures that don't have a huge metabolic demand just don't have a lot of blood vessels in them. And those are examples of them. I'm sure you can think of some others. Okay. So how metabolically active? What's the degree of vascularization, i.e., how much oxygen do they need? Do they need a whole hell of a lot to do a lot of work? Going to have a high degree of vascularization. Angiogenesis is the obviously formation of Genesis, formation of, and angio is blood vessels. Okay. This, when you go and train, okay, whether it's lifting weights, running, depending upon, your type of training method, aerobic training, we can increase angiogenesis. If we have in your coronary vessels, if there's a response, if there's a blockage that occur, you can have a small degree of vascularization occurs. It's kind of complex. I don't really want to get into it. The one I really want to mention though is adipose tissue. For every pound of weight that you gain, you add 5 miles of blood vessels. What the bleep? Fat is much worse. Why would be fat worse? If I gained weight by lean muscle mass, lifting weights, again, I'm increasing the mileage of blood vessels. 5 miles. So let's say I go to the gym, start lifting weights, increase my lean body mass by a pound. After a couple weeks, fabulous. I feel great about myself. And I've added 5 miles of blood vessels. I hope now you're thinking, if I add 5 miles of blood vessels, who has to pump that crap? My heart. So now my heart has to work more. I got to pump through more blood vessels. But is skeletal muscle and fat the same? I hope you're sitting there going, no. Adipose is not metabolically active. White fat is not metabolically active. It's quote unquote dead weight. Sedentary lifestyle. Not exercising, not eating right. You gain a ton of fat. For every pound of fat that you gain, that's 5 miles of blood vessels that you're adding to the body. Go to the gym, exercise, lift weights. For every pound of lean body mass, you're gaining 5 miles of blood vessels. But it's not the same. Skeletal muscle is metabolically active. So you're going to burn more calories. You're going to be more effective pumper, especially if you tailor that in with some cardio. So it's not the same if you compare skeletal muscle and fat adipose tissue. That's about 500,000 miles per day for a typical heart to push blood around. 70 beats per minute. It's about 100, a little over 100,000, 700 beats per minute times, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 times 24, 1440 minutes in a day times 70 beats per minute. That is 100,000, a little over 100,000, 100,800. 100,800 by number of miles that you're adding on. So, you're looking at 500,000 miles that your blood has to be pumped through. That's a lot of freaking work. I didn't even throw the C word into it, cancer. What about cancer? What about tumor angiogenesis? That's a whole bundle of crap that you really don't want. So I could put cancer cells in here too. And if you eat like shit, you're going to be feeding that cancer that stuff. And then it's going to grow and form more blood vessels and get bigger. Ugh. Don't even want to think about that. Regression would occur if you lost weight. Okay. So if you lose that, you would get some regression of blood vessels going to that adipose. If you got up, started moving around and watching your weight a little bit, watching what you eat a little bit, you're going to lose that adipose. And you're going to have a regression of those blood vessels as well, because you have a regression in the size of your adipose tissue. So one of the major factors associated with blood flow into a structure is how many blood vessels you have and the rate at which you form them. And the type of tissue that you're forming depends on whether they're metabolically active, which will dictate how much your heart is going to have to work more. Because if you're eating crap and you're not exercising, let's say you eat a lot of fats, eat a lot of carbs, that gets transformed into fats. That excess fat going to get added to the waistline. Excess carbs, excess fats. Excess fat's going to get deposited, especially cholesterol, going to get deposited on the walls of those blood vessels, narrowing them up. Arteriosclerosis, atherosclerosis. Heart has to work harder, pushing blood forward through the system that's smaller now, increases the blood pressure, yada, 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 yada. And it just snowballs. Understanding all these things, you can kind of get a better handle on what is happening with high blood pressure and people's response to putting forth some effort. Muscle. It's the smooth muscle, right? In those arterioles, in those meta-arterioles. That's going to help really regulate flow into those capillary beds. As we get further and further and further in the vascular tree, right, away from the heart, cross-sectional area goes up, speed goes way down. How can I maintain proper speed through this capillary bed if I'm further and further and really farthest away from the heart? Smooth muscle. Have you ever taken a hose outside, turn on the water, and you got the hose and just dribbles out, right? But you put that thumb over 3/4 of it, and boy, it comes out at a high rate of speed. And now you can point that at your brother, and you can take the skin off of his face, right? Because of all that increase in pressure, I've vasoconstricted it. So contracture can bring around ways to increase speed or maintain the speed of the fluid at a constant rate. Chemicals. We have things that are vasodilators, things that are vasoconstrictors. Chemicals. Let's say we have a increase in metabolic activity. If we have an increase in metabolic activity, I have more metabolic byproducts, more metabolic waste. That is going to be something that the body's going to want to get rid of faster. So that's going to promote vasodilation. It's going to want more blood getting into the region, A, bringing more oxygen, because I have a much more greater metabolic demand. I'm running around. And B, I want to pick up all that metabolic waste, because all that metabolic waste can be detrimental if it accumulates a lot. So I want to bring a lot of blood flow in there to help pick up that junk and get it out of there. So there are a lot of chemicals just based on metabolic demand, metabolic need, all right, that can vasoconstrict and vasodilate. If I have a whole heck of a lot of oxygen into the tissues, well, it's maybe going to vasoconstrict and decrease blood flow into that capillary bed. But as soon as I become really active again, or if I'm just going to get up and move around, there's going to be a demand. There's going to be a change as I move across campus, as I walk across campus. Muscles are engaging. utilizing oxygen, making metabolic waste products. I'm going to open it up again. Okay. So we can regulate blood flow just on need, metabolic activity, and the increase in various different byproducts of metabolism, hydrogen ions, CO2, that's going to cause the body to either vasodilate or vasoconstrict, depending upon whether or not I have a lot of these metabolic byproducts. The book kind of separates these two concepts out of regulating blood flow. Here, talking about vasoactive chemicals. We have individual cells. Sorry. We have individual cells within tissues that detect these changes. Okay. They know when oxygen is declining. They know when nutrient levels are declining. They know when CO2, lactic acid, hydrogen ions, potassium increases. These are all metabolic waste. Okay. These are all metabolic waste. So they can vasoconstrict and vasodilate based upon these chemicals that are byproducts of the metabolic process. Talked about metabolism way back a decade ago now, it feels. Byproduct of some of those pathways was carbon dioxide. If we don't have enough oxygen, we get a buildup of lactic acid. Hydrogen ions accumulate. Free radicals accumulate. All of these things, the body's going to sense that there are specific chemical receptors within the tissues that will tell these blood vessels to vasodilate or vasoconstrict. And this is referred to as autoregulation. It doesn't have to have input from the brain to say vasodilate, vasoconstrict. We have chemoreceptors, chemical receptors right there that can detect this nonsense. That is autoregulation. We see this everywhere in the body. Cells, chemoreceptors within these specific structures that are detecting these levels. And it can affect the myogenic response in those regions because of this phenomena of autoregulation. That's all it is. Auto means self. Okay? Self-regulation. Think of it that way. Increased metabolic demand increases carbon dioxide output, lactic acid output. So let's just say it's your biceps. Increasing in activity. Right there at the bicep, chemoreceptors detect all that increase in waste. So it's going to vasodilate those blood vessels, those meta-arterioles, those arterioles leading into that capillary bed. More blood into it. Pick it up, get rid of it. What if you squeeze your finger? Go ahead and squeeze your finger really hard. I doubt you'll be able to see it. Okay. Squeeze it. It was, oh my God, look at that thing. It's super red. It's still super red. I've stopped all the blood flow. All the blood's getting captured right there. My finger's getting white down here. There's no blood returning. Ah, snap, look at that. I'm a warlock. Look at that. Ah, snap. See, I got really red. Now it's going back to normal. Gone, it's still red. Still a lot of blood there. It's, there we go. Going against gravity. Now it's back to normal. What is that? What if you cut off blood flow to a region, like I just did? Okay, sit there and do that to you. Grab your finger, pinch it. Okay, and then watch how all of a sudden it gets really super red. Blood is perfusing that area a lot. Why? Well, I mean, there was a slight little decrease in oxygen and nutrients getting to it. The demand of maintaining the status quo is needed. What was also accumulating? I mean, there's a lot of waste products accumulating. Reactive hyperthermia is that phenomena that happens when blood flow returns to a region where it's been temporarily cut off or disrupted. Going from outside in the cold weather to the inside of the house. Reactive hyperthermia. All of a sudden, those blood vessels that were restricted, constricted because of the cold, open right back up. When they get into a warmer environment, blood vessels get closer to the surface of the skin and get those fabulous red, rosy cheeks. Perfusing that region with blood to give all that stuff oxygen and pick up all the waste. What are some other things? Well, there's these three guys here are potent vasodilators. Histamine is going to be one of those chemicals that get released by the white blood cells. We talked about that when we talked about blood. It causes extreme vasodilation. This brings more blood into a region, and what's in more blood? More white blood cells. So histamine is a very short-term response to tissue damage associated with inflammation, a foreign invader coming in. Bradykinin does it as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about bradykinin, I think, when we talk about the inflammatory response, when we look at the lymphatic system. Nitric oxide is a potent chemical that the body makes. It's a potent vasodilator. Helps to dilate blood vessels and engorge the region with more blood. It's going to be part of the erection process in a guy. You could take nitric oxide as a supplement. Nitric oxide as a supplement, as an ergonomic aid, is a vasodilator. Opens up the blood vessels. Opens up the blood vessels. I can deliver more blood to the muscles, and I can have better performance, better recovery, increased muscle size, muscle growth, all that nonsense just because of a vasodilator. Thromboxins, prostaglandins, these are vasoconstrictors. Let's just use thromboxin as an example, okay? Because that, I think, would be the easiest one. Whenever you cut your blood, whenever you cut your blood vessel, what do we want to do? Vasospasm, to prevent that blood from leaving the body, right? One of the major chemicals involved with that to promote blood clotting are thromboxanes. Thromboxanes, thrombocyte, platelet. Thromboxins are vasoconstrictors. It makes sense that I want to vasoconstrict a region that I've cut in a blood vessel, and I want to maintain that vasoconstriction. I want to maintain a less amount of blood coming into that spot where I've cut the blood vessel. I want to not let my blood leave my body. So would it make sense that I would vasoconstrict and limit the amount of blood into that region that we have to cut? I hope so. So thromboxins is a major vasoconstrictor. And thromboxins we saw with the blood clotting process. So hopefully you'll remember that one. What are we all doing? What in the hell are we doing this for? We are doing this to maintain total blood flow through the system. All of these very local effectors are all there to maintain one thing and one thing only, and that is to maintain 5.25 liters per minute of blood being transported around the body. That's all it is. If you're going to exercise, it's going to be a hell of a lot more than you just sitting around like a bump on a log. Some athletes can get as high as like 42.3 liters per minute. Holy smokes, that's a lot of blood. But if you're a high-level athlete, your heart's an effective pumper. Your muscles are very effective. They can accept a huge volume of blood. They can push around a huge volume of blood all throughout the body every minute. How does it do this? By regulating blood flow into the tissues. And by tissues, I mean really skeletal muscles. More blood's going to be distributed to the skeletal muscles that are being really activated. I don't have to have a huge blood reservoir if I'm a high-level athlete or if I'm an athlete in general. I don't have to do that. I don't have to hold it in my veins. I can get that blood into where stuff needs to be done. All of this, myogenic response, degree of vasculature, autoregulation, hormones, chemicals being secreted by the body to affect autoregulation, all of it's there to help maintain the total blood flow throughout the body. And it's equal to the amount that the heart is pumping out, which 5.25 liters per minute. If you're sitting around doing nothing and it gets a lot lower, it could mean potential issues. If it's really, really high, you're usually active. That's the only reason why it would be really, 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 really high. Regulating this total amount of blood flow is dependent both upon the heart and these vessels. This is the basis for blood pressure. This is the basis for blood pressure.